Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. If you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today we have David Mark Young joining us from Golden Sheaf, which is a pre-prohibition brand that has been revived in the last handful of years. And we talk for an hour and we don't get through all of the talking points. So I think you can probably guess that we're going to see David again. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. This afternoon or evening or morning or whenever you happen to be consuming this, I have David Mark Young of Golden Sheaf Whiskey Company joining me. He's the owner, master blender. And I have kind of my first question is not directly related to the distillery operation, the blending operation, but and I asked something very, very similar of this when I had an opportunity a little bit over a year ago to sit down with Dixon. And I said, why can't you two, two very great product storytellers, leave something for the rest of us trolls that sit in our rooms and stare at a wall? Like you guys had to get into podcasting too to make the rest of us look bad. I mean, you just fantastic podcast, great environment. Can you leave something for the rest of us?
Is that a question?
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe it's more of
Right.
a statement, but
I appreciate
it
it. It is a
really
statement.
is
I
that
appreciate it. It's very
that
kind. Yeah, you just made my day, John. I appreciate that.
the podcast that the two of you guys do, I've enjoyed since its inception, and I had asked Dixon to join me before you guys got into that, and then he happened to
Okay.
join right after you started, and I was like, awesome! There's these great storytellers that are hopping out here and telling these product stories that the rest of us are trying to get into, but it's a fantastic production value. There's a lot of really solid information, and a lot of my research comes out of that. So I absolutely
Awesome.
am stealing stuff from you guys. But
Sure.
maybe the first thing here we can hit on. You have a really varied past. Um, how do you end up in Omaha specifically?
Omaha. So I was a military brat. Um, my father was active duty Air Force. So I was born on an Air Force base in Illinois, and um, he served 30 years in the Air Force. I also joined the military after I graduated high school, and I did a 6-year tour in the Marine Corps. When it came time to discharge, I had to figure out where I didn't really have a hometown, and
Mhm.
at the time, my folks had recently transferred from Europe. My father was stationed in Germany. Had moved to Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska. So I decided to go back to Illinois. Was fortunate enough to qualify for the Veterans Fund scholarship. So I went to Southern Illinois University, finished college, graduated, and then again reevaluated. Where am I going to settle down? I had a lot of options. Um, I was in the IT field or IT security, and chose to go. I took actually a lower paying job to be closer to family, and that's ultimately what brought me here originally. Having moved around as a kid a lot, I started to get a little stir crazy about year 3, year 4, and but dug in even deeper. It's been a great place to raise children. My children are adults now,
Mhm.
and so yeah, that's how I landed here. I've been here ever since.
And the world is absolutely flat at this point. And I did come across your educational background at SIU, which was where I had planned to go to college starting in '98, and so we were like this close to overlapping. I
Right.
ended up not there, but you have been through a lot of different career transformations, and the most recent one being this idea of being a whiskey brand, whiskey distillery, whiskey whatever owner.
Yeah.
Um, how do you get to that point? Like through all of the things that you've done, how you're like, yep, whiskey's it now.
Right. I just, luck, fate, chance. I think I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I do because um, I've had a lot of hobbies in my lifetime, hunting, shooting, different elements there, outdoors, hiking, archery, collecting various things, various sports. I've been um, I was not competitive, but I ran marathons for years and years and years. I did 30 some marathons, and when I get into something, I get into something. And so whiskey kind of became a hobby about while I was in college. Actually, I think maybe a little bit while I was in the Marine Corps, a little different kind of consumption that that
Yeah.
stage. But then I start to settle down, got a family, a big boy job, and can afford um, some of the finer things, and there's this allure, this whiskey lifestyle, and I was always drawn to that. It was a hobby, so it kind of started with having a few bottles, that maybe just had some age statement on them, mostly Scotch because of the um, more mature expressions they have and older age statements. Um, and dabbled in some of the international stuff, but there was always bourbon kind of on the back
Mhm.
shelf. And that collection started to grow, and then eventually, I don't know if it was just at some point it became front and center. Just fell in love with bourbon, and I had decided I wanted to focus on bourbon and learn bourbon
Mhm.
and master it, to some level. Which I'm sure some people think, oh, you just want to drink a lot, and that's part of it. But it's from a indulging aspect, but I love backstories. I love history in general, and I just that was really captivating for me to whether true or not. Some of these
Mhm.
backstories, and some stories are embellished, but they make it more interesting. And really, just became passionate about that, just like any other hobby that I had gotten into. I think the big hook, line, and sinker for me was stumbling upon Golden Sheaf and beginning to peel back the layers of that. And I really had to dig. I had to investigate because at the time there was very limited data on the internet, at least. So I had to research more traditional methods, including microfiche and um, visiting museums and having conversations with people, which made it even more fun because that to me was always part of the bourbon, the hunt, the search for those rare gems, and have what can't be had, or at least have what the elusive unicorns that. And I was really into it. I still am to this day. I say that all the time. That you can find me any time of the week, um, trolling up and down the aisles in a liquor store, even locally here. And
Mhm.
when I stumbled upon Golden Sheaf, that was really it for me. I felt like I had this secret, like I couldn't talk about it, I couldn't tell anybody about it because I had this little spark that said history repeats itself, and this was a really cool thing. It was a big deal. You could revive this, like this could be your thing, and it was such a cool little. And I've had tons of little imagination, dreams,
Mhm.
fantasies, but this one started to actually come together, and I can go back. It wasn't that long ago. I can go back to the time when I, kind of had Golden Sheaf in the palm of my hands, if you will, and had made some progress in unearthing some of the facts, and then even pulled some, had some legal folks dig into the history of it and the research the reality of owning and reviving, or taking ownership of something like that, recreating it. And I remember that at that point thinking this could be a reality. This could actually come to fruition, and I could see it. but I just had no idea how to get there, and that's another thing I really enjoy is problem solving. So kind of having that vision or idea, and then kind of backing into it from grassroots, and so that was really it. I mean, I've just always, short answer, I've just always been passionate about whiskey and more than just somebody that's got to drink it all the time, but I like to celebrate it, like share it, like talk about it, like chase it, like to collect it, take
Mhm.
pictures of it, share it, research it, all those whiskey nerd things.
Yeah, and this is definitely, I'm in the same place, and I think that's maybe part of the allure for whiskey as well. And you touched on it, and I hadn't really ever thought about it. Is the lack of digitization of a lot of the history that exists
Yeah.
within whiskey forces you to be physical in nature and how you acquire that. And I think about folks like Drew Hanish that are writing books, and they're actually
Hmm.
having to go to locations, or the revival of the Uncle Nearest brand by kind of digging through the records at Jack Daniels. A
Yeah.
lot of other history, you can just hop on Chat GPT and say, "Go give me all of this information." But
Yep.
at least within the whiskey world, a lot of it is still in a physical format somewhere, microfiche, microfilm.
Yeah.
I chuckled a little bit at that. My mom was huge into ancestry whenever I was a kid, and that was it. And so I spent a lot of time twisting the handle on a microfilm reader trying to understand that. And I didn't care about ancestry, but the dig for it seemed interesting. And
Yeah.
um, history's never 100% accurate. There's always some degree of
Sure.
embellishment, right? Because that's what
Yeah.
makes it interesting. Unless it's recorded on camera, and even if it's recorded on camera, you still don't get the before and the after, and
Right.
whatever. And I've always said, if you want, there are three sides to every story. There's your side, there's my side, and there's the truth, and it's somewhere in between those two things is
Yep.
where it normally lives. But Golden Sheaf has a really long history, and you sort of touched on that. Going back into the mid 1800s in Omaha, Nebraska, which is a whole other thing, right? Because we talk
Hmm.
about whiskey in the United States, it's always Kentucky or Virginia or Maryland or what, like where we're in kind of the cradle of settling in the United States.
Hmm.
But you're reviving a very storied brand that's more in the central part of the country. What is it? How does it feel to be a part of the resurrection of this type of a thing?
I love it. It's a dream come true. It really is. I wanted, um, initially it was an idea, kind of plant the seed, and then kind of, um, just create a path and start to venture down that path. And there have been, I guess, well, one thing is it's been extremely busy. It's been a lot, and I find myself just kind of jumping from thing to thing, and that's how I spend my time. But I've every once in a while I will stop and stumble upon something, some accolade, or a medal, or an article, or it's only been a handful of years, but it reminds me that I need to stop and smell the roses, and
Mhm.
truly appreciate, because literally when it first started, it was, wow, this is starting to come together. That here's the label. I remember hand drawing the label and putting it in a bottle, and it just sat there, and I would look at it every day, and then once I received the first label, the actual label, um, it was a moment. It was, wow, this is happening. And then all of the milestones along the way, actually, um, achieving, being able to sell a bottle retail in that first sale, and um, you know, folks ask for me to sign bottles all the time. The first time I signed a bottle, these are all very vivid memories, and I have to stop and remind myself to remember those things, because I just get so caught up in the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and um, but there's always, daily, there's something that reminds me of, gosh, this is, it almost seems too good to be true. It's so much fun. I feel like, I'm an evangelist. I feel like I'm on a mission to share the good word, preach my gospel. And, it's a little bit of history kind of in general. It's a lot of the brand history, but then, um, I get to tell my story about what I do, what my contribution, because that's what Golden Sheaf is today. Is it's a celebration of the historical brand and how it evolved to be what it was then, and eventually today. And now my contribution is the blending, my expertise, and creating the product. So I never want to lose sight of that.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm really loving being able to do what I do, my contribution. But there's that other piece that is just such a great honor and joy to be a part of and to be associated with that.
Mhm.
Somebody will call me the whiskey guy or the bourbon guy or the Golden Sheaf guy or something, and I'm like, that's cool. That's super cool. It never gets old. And yeah, it warms my heart. It fills my heart every day.
Mhm. And it feels like a place where, and maybe you suffer from this, maybe you don't, where occasionally you might let imposter syndrome creep in, where somebody's like, "Oh, there's the whiskey guy," and you're like, "Am I really the whiskey guy?" But you're like, "Yeah, no, I am," and you've gained that. And I've heard someone say before, a great way to become a millionaire as a whiskey brand owner is to start with $1 billion, right?
Right.
Um, in starting up a brand is costly. There's a lot of logistics to it. Is there anything about it that is surprising to you? If you look back at where you began to now, is there something you're like, if I'd have known this, I might not have made this leap?
I've never said that. That's interesting you say that because we had Jonathan Crocker with Frank August on Dixon. I had him on the Blending Bourbon podcast um, a few weeks ago, and Jonathan made that statement. He said, "Man, if I was shocked when he said that. I thought, first of all, wow, you're pretty fucking brave to admit that."
Mhm.
Um, but also, it took me back. Have I ever thought that? Have I ever thought that? And sure, at the end of a hard day, um, I don't know that I would ever leave it though. I learned things about the industry. Um, Again, I love a good challenge. I love a good problem to solve, and that's what it is. It's a series of challenges and problems, and that's how I look at it. It's adventure for me. Nothing's ever really deterred me or wanted me to throw in the towel. Cash flow ebbs and flows. We're riding high and got a bank full of cash, and then all of a sudden it's time to uh, pay some bills, right? And all of a sudden, and that's just um, starting a business, right? That's
Mhm.
entrepreneurship, um, and then there's the kind of the some of the political challenges or even compliance, that sort of thing. And I love learning about it. I think I just kind of embrace it because it has to be hard at some point, right? The I don't want to say the majority of it or even a certain percentage of it, but a lot of it is just it's a luxury. It's like tonight I've got this great event. Um and I find myself in meetings and it's work. I always joke around. I'm like, gosh, this is work. This is I'm hanging out with some whiskey icons, some of my heroes, and
Mhm.
I'm getting to do podcasts and I'm getting to share whiskey, drink whiskey with people, and that's my job. I'm getting to make whiskey and share it with people, and there's just for me, there's such joy in that. I love I love it when I get my hands dirty and roll barrels
Mhm.
around and do the heavy lifting stuff. Um, because I'm definitely not a designed to be sitting in an office chair all the time and and so constantly being on the move, um learning, um doing all the things, it it enables me. I don't think it's ever
Mhm.
deterred me. um I was just ironically, I was getting ready for this and I was listening to a podcast, and Jocko Willink, if you're familiar with Jocko Willink,
Mhm. Yep.
there was a little snippet of one of his where he's talking about one of his guys coming to him, and he's like, Jocko, I got some bad news or whatever. Jocko's such a great storyteller, and he's such a, he's dramatic, but he's not, he's
Mhm.
just real intense. And he says, every time I come to you, I've got something to bring to you, and it's bad news, and I know exactly what you're going to say. You're going to say good, and because every time I come to you and say the sky is falling, you tell me good, or this broke good, and that's Jocko. Jocko's like good because some good's going to come out of it. Some good's going to come out of it in the middle, the end, whatever. And I was like, that's such a great mind shift. And I could really that resonated with me, and there certainly have been times when I'm given some kind of challenging news or something, and my first reaction is fuck, I'm upset.
Yeah.
But those challenges, that adversity, at the end of the day, it does enable me. It motivates me, inspires me, because I know when I get over that, there's going to be some greatness to celebrate.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jocko, and Extreme Ownership was
Yeah.
a book I read at the last transition that I had in my professional career. And I found myself, he is a fantastic storyteller. I found myself, all of the military story portion of each chapter, I would read like every single word. And then when we
Mm-hmm.
got to the corporate implementation of it, I would be like, okay, I can skim this part. This part's far less interesting to me. Give me the part that's different, and I can see the correlation between the two. And there's a lot of really strong business principles, but yeah,
Oh
he's
yeah.
a fantastic storyteller without a
Yeah.
doubt.
What just real quick on that is, there's core values I've taken away
Mhm.
from that, and I applied it kind of in a corporate sense, but also here, building brand and that sort of thing. And prioritize and execute is a daily thing for me. It's
Mhm.
ingrained in my brain, and I've also got the attention span of a 5-year-old on Christmas Day. Big, and there's this stuff constantly flying in, and I'm like, that's cool. I want to do that. That's cool. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do all these
Mhm.
different things. But at the end of the day, you have to prioritize and execute, because otherwise you'd be stretched so thin, and nothing's done well.
Yeah, and it I think I've used this term before when I've asked people about this, and I was listening to the Frank August episode, a couple weeks ago or a week ago, whenever it was that you guys did it, um, but I've used the term like optimistic ignorance before, or ignorant optimism, yeah, and it's not an insult. It's like there's a lot of things in my life that if I'd have known how hard it was, that older version of me might have been like, probably not. Maybe
Right.
I'll try some other thing, without understanding that the other thing may be equally as painful or difficult.
Yeah.
But shifting gears a little bit, um, the focus of Golden Sheaf right now is blending. And I've talked about it a lot recently with a lot of different people. I've had the opportunity to talk with Doc Swenson's, and I've talked with Penelope in the past, and all of these different people that are um, doing exactly what you're doing. And historically, blending in the American whiskey population was kind of a negative connotation. You were trying to
Mhm.
um, blend for an intent, to try to get some sort of a homogenous end result, or hide faults or whatever. But
Right.
you are participating in this group of people, whether it's intentional or not, that are trying to sort of turn that on end. Um, was that part of the original intent of Golden Chief, or you just like, this is what I have available to me, and so that's what I'm going to do?
Yes and no. Uh, I like to think I'm a, a hobbyist blender. I've always, but I never looked at it as blending bourbon. I never looked at it as creating something. It was always selfishly making something more the way I would appreciate it. And the same with food, and beverages. The same. Um, say this all the time. I'm an amazing chef, but not everybody likes their food, saturated in Frank's Red Hot and garlic. And
Mhm.
so when I would blend whiskeys together, to me that's no different than making a cocktail. Making an old fashioned. I try old fashions all the time, and I think that's good. But a little bit of this make it a little bit better. But that's my taste. So I started to notice kind of a trend in some of the flavor profiles that I would pursue as a hobbyist, and um, at least the way they're described, kind of felt like I don't want to say I had like, I think I have good taste. I guess
Hmm.
put it simply. When Golden Sheaf first became a thing, as I was kind of piecing it together, building it out, I intentionally sourced the components to make up the original recipe, which is a 59 corn, 39 wheat, 2% malted barley, and to again celebrate that, um, the historicness of Golden Sheaf. And um, so when that came together, that was cool too. That was was
Hmm.
milestone events. Like, now we're tasting what they tasted back then, which I guarantee it didn't quite taste like what we put
Right.
together. And it won some accolades. I know it won a U.S. Open whiskey competition silver medal, um, which was a huge deal because it didn't even have a label on it at the time. It was a blind, it was just a bottle with a Sharpie handwritten note, and then I did this one page kind of white paper or multi-page white paper thing. So it was a combination backstory, original recipe. Here's the recreated original recipe, and um, but I also socialized that blend um, quite a bit
Hmm.
to the point where I was questioning how much product we're going to be able to yield here.
Right.
Um, but when the proofing to me that was I think that was the sticking point to where I'm actually blending stuff. So I'm creating, recreating something. I've got some plans or a design, that I'm following a recipe, but the proof was up in the air. Was it 100 proof? Was it below? There was just no real way to tell the original recipe, at least from what I've yet to uncover anything uh, like that. I'm assuming it was 100 proof, but um, I started with cask strength, and it was a 129, I believe. Once the blend was performed, and it was ended up being a 7-year blend. Um, so I started at 129, and I spent days and weeks on this. It was about a month and a half on this thing. I would proof it to, and I'm using a manual hydrometer, and so
Hmm.
I'm like, droplets of water in this little sample that I have, and I taste it, and I'm like, I can't really taste the difference. Let me drop it down to 115, and then but then I, kind of honed in between 100 and 120. Okay, cool. And I just kept closing in. And I tasted a little higher proof, and I couldn't pinpoint what the best was. That was ultimately the basis for my process today, and how I come up with what I call the appropriate proof for each blend. Um, and Yeah, I just kept tinkering with it, and all of a sudden we land at 103, and here we are, original recipe. Get that in the bottle on the shelf, and from there it was, okay, now we've got this stuff. Let's see what else we can do, and I really started to just blending was a constant thing for me. I I can't wait to get back to it once I've got my lab kind of built out. Not right, I've got a
Hmm.
lab now, but I've got some other equipment and whatnot. But I never imagine. So get back on track. We put batch one out, and that was supposed to be it. Right. I
Hmm.
hadn't thought beyond what Golden Sheaf looked like. It was just going to be a revival of the original brand, original recipe. Put it out. COVID hits. Um, my source, my barrel provider says, supply chains are disrupted. Everything's broken in every industry, right? So
Hmm.
um, I'm a small startup. I've got my own cash. And, I had started out with, I think, 5 barrels, 7 barrels, I forget. And they said, oh, we've increased our MOQ to 100, 200 barrels. You got to buy, I'm like, I can't afford to buy
Hmm.
200 barrels right now. Same with glass provider, went from buying a pallet of glass, 1,000 bottles at a time, to a shipping container. You have to buy a minimum of 20,000 bottles. So it changed everything for me. So then I end up um, just kind of, going from contact that I had in the industry, and just kind of asking, hey, what are you guys doing now? Are you able to buy 1,000 barrels at a time? Are you able, do you have any extras? Like, and so kind of bartering, negotiating 1 barrel, 2 barrels
Hmm.
here. And then as I start to get those samples, then I start playing with them. They become ingredients for me. And it's like, well, I've only got 8 of these barrels. I can do something. Let me see what, and that's really where it unraveled for me. All of a sudden, that's my niche, and I'm gonna pull
Hmm.
that thread even further. And then I get into finishes, but it had that's truly the origin where it took something that I did as a hobbyist, and I think I did it really well. I'd share that stuff with people, and they're like, "Oh man, you should sell this stuff," just kind
Hmm.
of jokingly. Never took it serious. Um, which in hindsight, um, I think one of the biggest breweries here in Nebraska Brewing Company, a friend of mine for years made beer home. He's a home brewer,
Hmm.
and today he runs. I used to tell him that all the time. Man, this stuff's good. You ought to sell this stuff. And he and I were in IT together, and
Hmm.
now he makes beer and I make whiskey. It's kind of ironic.
Yeah. And I think globally, one of the criticisms of bourbon and American whiskey has been that it has been sort of too one note. It's always like super sweet. Anybody who's into Scotch, they're looking for subtle nuances, um, and I mentioned this a minute ago, but most of the blending occurred to try to get towards a uniformity. But with this new kind of resurgence or acceptance of blending to differentiate and to create novel expressions, do you think this is is indicative of maturation of the whiskey market in the North American marketplace, or is it just there's so much stuff out there, they're just trying to find something a unique way to get the consumer's attention?
I think it's a lot of it's the American way. We're not happy with any one thing, and not, we need too many options in order to be satisfied. You drive down the road, and you pull up to an intersection. There's a freaking drugstore on every corner, right? There's a
Hmm.
coffee shop, a different one on every corner. And so one side of the street there's Target, the other side of the street there's Walmart. You're gonna drive a Ford or a Chevy or a Chrysler. It's just option. The options are, they go on and on and
Hmm.
on. And so there's a number of things I see happening. I think there's an awakening in the American whiskey consumer base, as far as there's this allure of um, the spirit and the lifestyle that comes along with it. And it's kind of a level of sophistication that some folks um, strive toward. And you see the commercials, um, and so now there's this sprawl into literally every demographic in the country, um, male, female, regardless of age, geographic location. So it's become this common kind of bond thing. And so that opens it up for variety, and, um, have more options. I mean, the whiskey market is pretty saturated. There are so many whiskey SKUs out there. And, but I think that's the great thing about it, is there are so many unique whiskeys out there. There's really not, well, not many that are overlapping. There's one thing I don't care for, and I'll just say this. I try not to be controversial, but I love whiskeys, and I give anybody credit that's putting juice in a bottle and putting a label on it. One thing that I don't really support, I should say, is for someone to source another product and then just slap a label on it and call it theirs.
Hmm.
And that's um, like you said, being an NDP, being a blender, I don't distill my own whiskey. That's always the first question people ask: where do you distill? I don't distill. I'm a blender. I acquire um, by aged barrels from all over the country, and kind of explain the whole process. But um, similar to an artist, right? Artists, a painter doesn't make their own paint. They don't carve their own brushes, and they don't certainly don't stretch their own canvases, or make their own, all of their stuff from
Mhm.
scratch. Same with a chef. A chef's going to do chicken, pork, beef, fish, but they season it to their style. That they create their unique dish. And so um, as I network and get to know those universes a little more, I definitely appreciate that a little more, because that's similar to what I'm doing. Is I decide, am I going to do a single malt? Am I going to do a rye? Am I going to do a wheat? Am I going to do a bourbon? Um, and that's the basis of the product. But then, what does it look like? How do I put my spin on it? And that's why I've created my unique proofing process, and create my unique mash bills. And it's a recipe, and my barrels are um, my ingredients. Once I decide what that foundational product is going to be, and then I um, try to get creative. Even take it and finish it in something, and sometimes there's even blending after that. But um, yeah, it's really cool how everybody's kind of got their niche. And
Mhm.
that to me was one of the biggest challenges, was what's going to differentiate me, or my products from others out in the industry. And it's there's still so much yet to be done. There's so much um, that you can do as first finishes, and mash bills and origins and proofs and all the things. um, yeah, it's go ahead.
There, yeah, there's a lot there. And you've mentioned finishes a couple of times, and we're going to get there. And I've got maybe one last question around blending. And it feels like, in listening to you on your podcast and talking with you right now, that you have very much a startup brain, where you like the sort of maybe the tension that comes with being a part of a startup at a small group that's trying to achieve a thing, right? Like you've got a goal and you're going to work toward it. And you've mentioned several things. Do you think? And then you also just said a few seconds ago, you said you get the attention span of a 5 year old. I think is what it is. Do you think that these batched blends, where you're not trying to get back to what you've already done before, but you're trying to create the thing that it is, do you think that helps tickle the ADHD or the entrepreneurial brain of like doing something new now, because you're not doing the exact same thing over and over again?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. It's there's definitely a creative aspect that I enjoy. And that's also by design a little bit. Just kind of um, being a hunter of whiskey. I want that unique product. I want that unique blend or expression that I can't have. You see it
Hmm.
in a picture, you see it on social, you see it advertised somewhere, and a lot of times you're just not going to get it. Somebody's going to get it, but it's
Hmm.
elusive, it's unicorn. And so that's part of the model. Absolutely, is to be able to sustain us. I could very easily, and I am actually. I'm working on a product right now. It's going to be a constant. It's going to be lower price point. It'll be readily available, and in larger volumes. It's a good product. It's actually the
Hmm.
original recipe again. It's coming back, and it was that good that I've got the confidence that it'll be something that people will want on a regular basis. And then we'll continue to um, you know be creative, and put those new things out there. So yeah, absolutely. I love that. I don't know that I could just make the same widget over and over and over and be satisfied with,
Hmm.
that there would be something that would come along and um, distract me from that for sure.
Yeah, and so kind of shifting gears a little bit. You've mentioned finishes, and you do finished whiskeys, and I think I've seen you've done a maple syrup, you've done a barley wine, you've done a port. H- how have how do you identify the finishes that you want to explore? Because we're in a world right now where there's an almost infinite number of different finishes that people are chasing down, and some of them seem real, and some of them don't seem so real. If somebody says, "Hey, I'm doing a cherry cordial finish," I'm like, that doesn't sound like anything unless you blended 3 or 4 things together to get there.
Right, right.
How are you identifying um, what you want to do with finishing?
Um, that's a great question. Um, there's stuff that works in the industry, so you kind of want to follow suit, or um, pretty much everything I've put out to date has been done. Everything I've put out has been done. So it's great to have that. Um, you know, when I decided to do a maple syrup cask finish, I went and bought every maple syrup cask finish whiskey I could find, and that was um, my starting point. I wanted to make something better. I had a good reference point. Again, going back to what I've always done, I'll try something and think, how could that be better? And so that was a great way to learn. Um, and also study those, and a lot of them were smaller brands, but some of them were some of the bigger brands, and um, see what people liked, and then be able to improve that. So some of it's also just personal preference, what I like, what I think works, and how can I get creative. So I've been talking about this thing for, I feel like, forever, but it hasn't been that long. But it's a rye finished in, it's a rye blend that I put together that I was really proud of. I had some unique older corn whiskey in it, which I call my miracle juice. I put a drop of that in every batch I do. Just no, it's I found this great source of this. It's a corn bourbon, a heavy corn bourbon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just very bold, and it seems to resonate with anything I blend it with. It's almost like if you're editing photos on your iPhone, and there's that button that you just hit it just enhances it. It's like,
Yep.
oh, that's a good picture. Boom, now it's better. Well, I feel like that's what it is. I just hit that little button or put that little drop in there. Um, but I love this rye blend. It's very high rye, which is it was good. It was a solid blend, but then finished in a white port cask, so a sweet white wine. It's amazing. It's incredible, and um, it's it's going to be something else when it gets into the bottle. And I'm saving it for my own bottling operation that we're wrapping up. We've construction wise, we pretty much got that in place. We're just waiting on a few compliance um, licensing things to be able to get that. But I do have a partnership with Bardstown Bourbon Company, and that's where that barrel is right now. So I've been
Mm-hmm.
really holding back from pulling the trigger, just having it bottled down there. I want to bottle it myself. I want to have that pride of ownership because it's such a solid juice. But that was kind of on a whim. I had tried a Sauterne finish Scotch, which um, I'm just I'm trying. I'm trying to get into scotches.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I started. That's where I cut my teeth, and I thought I loved them until I got into bourbons, and then I decided to focus on bourbons for a long, long time, and love bourbons. And now I'm trying to focus on making bourbons, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
also getting out of the bounds there, and trying other things. So I try this Sauterne, it's French sweet white wine
Yep.
finish, and I thought that's good, except for the Scotch overtones. If you could kind of round that off a little bit. Um, so then I kind of went down that path of sourcing some sweet white wine finish or barrels. Still working on Sauterne. I'd love to experiment with that. And I'm also, there's so I'm in an experimental phase right now, and the thing about that though is it's it's not, I'm not sitting on mountains of cash to be able to just, throw these different things around and experiment. I'm trying to create some good stuff and put it out there. So the whole barley wine cask finish thing, that was an experiment. It was ended up being from a brewery they had a 10-year, a former 10-year-old Eagle Rare barrel that they had sourced, and then they put barley wine in it for 14 months, and they make an exceptional barley wine, very very good. Um, and so they literally, the day that they dumped that, it was Jukes Ale Works, by the way. I give them a little plug.
Mhm.
Just talking with Kyle yesterday, Kyle Jukes. Once they dumped that barley wine, I thought, this is exciting. It's going to work, right? I'm
Mhm.
going to take this amazing, the seasoned barrel, the history of it. It makes for a more interesting backstory. Took it down to the shop that day, filled it up full of bourbon. Just I think I watched it for a couple minutes, expecting something magical to happen. And a couple days later, tried it, and a couple weeks later, tried it. Sat on this thing for months, and it the magic didn't happen.
Mhm.
Um, it wasn't bad, but it was not so instant blending component, right? That's how that became a blend of a maple syrup cask finish and a um, barley wine cask finish, and the two of them together, I think it's actually one of my favorites these days. I've been sampling it
Mhm.
a lot lately, and I've had a lot of requests for it, and we're getting down to the final few bottles left in that batch, and people are starting to get. It's cool. Typically, when something dries up, it's gone. That's when it becomes more popular. You don't have any of it left, at least for
Mhm.
me. Being smaller batch, and um, so it's yeah, it's kind of some of them are just. I probably will never do an Ambarana finish. Not my favorite. Everybody that's done it,
Mhm.
good. Kudos to them. They've done a good job. I think Penelope was probably my favorite with the honey barrel
Mhm.
Ambarana. But similar to what's the there's another one that Peerless did a finish absinthe.
Absinthe. Yeah, they did a rye and absinthe.
Did you try that one?
Like absinthe is one of those things that I want to like craft absinthe because I want to like craft distillers. Like I want to
Yeah,
be,
yeah,
but when you start from a place of hating the flavor of anise or black licorice, you have a
yeah.
hard time really liking any absinthe, regardless of its quality. Now, I'm able to
Right.
taste some absinthes that are, I can tell this is a high quality absinthe, but it still tastes terrible to me. And so, no, the long story short is I did not, and it's not because I don't think it's good. For a person who is okay with those flavors, it's probably phenomenal, but
Yeah.
it's not, it's very divisive flavor.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't my favorite. I'll just say that. I love
Mhm.
Peerless. They do some amazing things. And
Yeah.
so I turned down the opportunity to buy that bottle multiple times. And I kept kicking myself for just because it's so unique, and I thought, God,
Yeah.
good for them for pushing the boundaries, and it must be good. If they committed to putting it in a bottle, it must be good. So I actually was where was I? Was at a little place in Bardstown. They had it on the shelf, and I said, "Yeah, let's try that. Let's." I always try to try something new if I have the chance, and poured a neat pour, and tried it, and I immediately kind of cringed. And the bartender says, "It's not your jam, huh?" And I said, "Hey, I'll give it a minute.
Mhm.
Let me sip on this. Let it sink in." And no, it didn't work for me. And
Okay.
he comes over and he says, "I can repurpose that if you like." And I sure, do what you want. And he turned it into a Sazerac, a little
Okay.
cocktail, and it was amazing. It was
Yeah,
great.
that makes sense. Yeah, that was probably phenomenal.
It was very good.
And you mentioned sauternes, and I've had a couple of bourbons that were finished in sauternes, and it's really easy for it to get buried. But you also touched point on that you are sitting on a white port, and I think you're probably the fourth or fifth brand that I've talked to that has a white port potentially happening in 2024. It
Okay.
feels like 24 is the year of the white port. I'm excited for it. It was on my list of questions to ask you, not because other people are doing it, because I noticed, um, with your other port, you partnered with a Nebraska specific winery, James Arthur Vineyards.
Yep.
And when I go look at their wines, I see they have a white port as well. So is
Yep.
your white port their white port, or is
It
it you
is.
just it got a different? Okay,
Yep.
that was where I was heading, because it seems like all of your partnerships for finishing, not maybe not all of them, but some of them are very hyper local, very regional to you?
Most of them, yeah. I love collaborating with local.
Hmm.
James Arthur's always been. Um, I've been familiar with them and long before I got into this, and was a fan of their products and their experience. They've got a beautiful vineyard, beautiful winery, great people. So then when I did this, I thought, gosh, who better um, to initially reach out to? So we did the port, and it's interesting. We're Americans. Bourbon's ours, right? Don't mess with our
Hmm.
bourbon. You try to make bourbon, we will take over your country, hostile takeover. Um, very passionate about it. Keep that close to the chest. And you would imagine we would respect, others that have the same, like, Scotch made in Scotland, port
Hmm.
is supposed to be made in Portugal. And so, I've had people call that out, well, how the heck you get a port? Where'd you get your port barrels from? Did you bring them all the way over from Portugal? No, they came from down the road and, outside of Lincoln, Nebraska. Well, can they make a port? And so they
Hmm.
call it I've got a bottle. Yeah, got a bottle right here. It's called that's probably backwards, but they call it a Trapasti port. Which sounds very fancy, right? And
Hmm.
that's people see that and they're like Trapasti. That's in the Tropast region of the Upper
I
Peninsula.
assumed it was like a monastery. When I first read the word
Right?
trapasti, I was like, that feels like a monastery where they're making port. Like there's a
Yeah,
bunch of monks walking around, not talking to each other, making port, and you got those barrels. And then when I dug in, I was like, oh, this is a local thing, but I didn't look at the why of it. So I'll let you finish.
yeah. So I heard this podcast. It was maybe a year ago. Um, and they featured Golden Sheaf on there, and they were talking about this. I guess it wasn't quite a year ago, but we had won. I think we won a double platinum for that expression, and they're talking about this, and they're like, "Yeah, they really built it up." And the Trapasti, are you familiar with that? And one of the guys says, "Oh yeah, that's elusive. That's the unicorns of all ports, and the Mecca, the motherland, and they're building it up." And um, I had the chance to actually be on that podcast about 6 months later, and they wanted me to tell a story, and I'm like, oh, how do I tell them this without making them feel like idiots? Because they totally made that story up, and when I
Hmm.
told them Trapasti it's a port backwards, they were shocked. So if you if you spell it backwards, it just spells out it's a port, and which is kind of a funny story. But sorry to the Portuguese for stealing that. Or I didn't steal it, but
Yeah, the United States did. We'll just own
yeah,
that as a citizenry of this nation.
yeah.
You know,
Come
we
at me,
we
bro.
we like to steal the things, and I guess technically, if they're saying it's one of the hardest to find, that is very true, right? Because if you go look for capacities, there's only maybe like two or three brands that make one, and so if all you did
Right.
was a 15-second Google search, that's probably
Yep.
what you came up with. Like, oh, there's
Yeah.
not many people making this. This is very elusive.
Yeah, very
Rare
elusive.
doesn't
Yeah.
always mean good,
Right.
as well. And not to say that theirs is bad, but I'm saying that just
Yeah.
because you only find three, maybe it's kind of like absinthe finished rye. Maybe only one
Right.
person's making it because that's the entire market is one
Yeah.
person.
And that's the thing is these guys make so I was
Yep.
fortunate enough to get a number of bottles and actually went out for their release and um it's good. It's I forget 12 or 14 years old. It's just a really good. I appreciate a good port. So
Hmm.
yeah, it pays homage to that tradition of that port style wine. Um but aside from that, the um a lot of the others are local. I do have a number of things in the barrels now finishing, um, and we'll see how they turn out. I don't want to put some false hope out there about what they. I am working on a cigar blend,
Hmm.
which is a variety of things. And if you kind of follow cigar blends and what's traditionally, traditional components of that, there is some traditional, there's some non-traditional that I think work well with
Hmm.
cigars. Um, but yeah, I've started to, with the help of folks like Midwest Barrel Company, if you're familiar with them, Ben
Hmm.
and Jess Los, they recently moved the operation to Louisville, Kentucky, but they were actually based here in Nebraska up until last year, and so they do a great job of sourcing and disseminating international barrels of all style, shape, um, type. Yeah, it's they got a great operation.
So, and you can feel free to tell me you can't answer this, but staying in the finishing category, I notice Glacial Till Cider House just releases cider that was finished in y'all's barrel.
Yeah,
Are you bringing that barrel back to then subsequently attempt to finish, or is that a no, or is that a I'm not going to answer that question.
it's a hard yes, and it's
Okay.
already been done. So I've actually got
Mhm.
something in the works from a former project. So it's and it's been in the barrel for a while. It's a aged. It's what is it, 11, 12 years old now. A wheat whiskey that's been in a cider barrel. But yeah, those barrels. So there's a little bit of incest going on here in the community.
Mhm.
Where just like the Eagle Rare barrel was bourbon, then
Yep.
became barley wine. Now it's back to bourbon, and so it'll probably be passed around. It makes for great seasoning.
Mhm.
You mix it up, and it's it's all the same thing with maple syrup cask barrel. And it's cool what you look at honey barrels and you look at maple syrup cask, and liquid is one thing, but to have something that really changes molecularly within the barrel, um, and then you're able the barrel seasoned with that, you get more than just a marriage of maple syrup, remnants and whiskey. It's pretty cool because then there you get this kind of metamorphosis where the crystallized um, sugars are in the porous parts of the barrel, and then of course you add the liquid to it, and that's then liquefied over time and marries with the liquid, and then the liquid takes the place of those wood pores, and um, it's just pretty cool
Mhm.
to try all the different things. Yeah, and then you get different reactions from climate, or temperatures. Obviously, affect that. I've um, been experimenting with different, cold and warm exposures, and um, not to mention just the mash bills and the proof themselves really affect that pretty drastically as far as altering that flavor profile, good and bad. Um, so I've got probably more experimentation going on behind the scenes than I than I should, but they all end up yielding something. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, so there's some pretty cool stuff coming down the.
And not to ask for the specific details of it, but do you have that one project that you don't know if it's ever going to see the light of day because it's just not good, but you're like, just keep running and see what happens.
Yeah, I think my what's it called, signature. Uh, I've got this reserve signature series that I'm working on, and um it does a couple things. Brand wise, it highlights the new era of Golden Sheaf, and the true luxury aspect of our brand. And this is um, my baby project. I've really spent a lot of time doing this, and I'll kind of tweak the blend here and there. So I started down the path of sourcing some really, really aged product, and then decided I got to back off. It's not going to be a bunch of 20+ year um, products components put together. It's got to have some younger stuff, and this is where experimentation really pays off, and um, understanding truly blending, and how to. I grade all my products, all my blends on the the heat, the balance of the heat and flavor, the flavor itself, the complexity of the blend, and just flavor it in and of itself. So I'm looking for maximum flavor. I'm looking for the balance of heat and flavor, and to the point to where the heat um, accentuates the flavor, um, but then maturity, the complexity, the mouthfeel of that. And so I feel like with a lot of the older products, 23 years ish, with a lot of those, you get a couple of those things, but you don't get them all. And so you kind of have to complement that with some younger whiskeys. Right now, it kind of bottoms out at 10-year. Got a 10-year, 13-year, 17, and a 23. And I've tried to remove a component and then try, it's just, it seems like it's a never ending process. Like I keep removing stuff and adding stuff. And, but I think I've revisited what I think is the final blend here enough times to where it just needs to go in the bottle, and I've experts, folks like Dixon or, other people in the industry, they're like, if it's good, just put it in the damn bottle. Just get it going, but I'm aging some of it still. I want to age it a little bit longer. I want, it's going in a direction, and I've tested it enough over, a period of time to where I can kind of, predict a path. And once I can kind of envision, what I want that component to taste like because of the way that it's affecting the rest of the blend. And I'm a little bit stubborn. I'm also a little bit definitely overthink. So who knows? It may never make it into a bottle.
Mm-hmm. Well, it may never make it into a commercial bottle. I mean, somebody's going to drink it eventually, right? And we're pushing up against time, and I want to be very cognizant of that. So I'm not trying to steal anything more from you. And you mentioned in the beginning of that Golden Sheaf is positioned as a luxury whiskey. What is it like trying to compete in that space as a relative newcomer, right? Because a lot of brands are not exclusively luxury brands. They just have luxury offerings. But
Right.
Golden Sheaf enters in and says, no, we're a luxury brand.
Yeah. I still think there's a void for that. It's, it seems like there's always a new bottle or 2 or 10 hitting the shelf, every week. And, there's some beautiful stuff out there. I think my latest, loves is, Frank August. I really love that product. It's simple to the point. It's, great juice. It has a great theme, backstory. Jonathan's awesome. It's one of my favorites, and they're a hot product right now. So I think that category is beginning to evolve. I don't think it's actually been there. When you look at some of the products in the past, and or perhaps a new category is evolving, and it's above the others. And I think that's where blending comes into play. And it's not because our market is has more aged product in it. It's because we're evolving as far as the craft and being able to expertly craft whiskeys to the desires of the consumers. And that's just it. There's such a consumer base, and now there's American whiskey consumers are really spoiled with what's out there, but we always want more, and we'll continue to want more, and producers will continue to produce more. And so that opens it up for folks like me and Jonathan and other luxury brands to be able to fill that void, that space. Wasn't that long ago that I mean, it was, but Pappy kind of filled the void of the Billionaires bourbon, right? And I kind of jokingly, but there's some seriousness to it, reached out to Elon Musk and said, hey, when you become a trillionaire, what would you like to consume bourbon wise? Let's go ahead and make that now. We'll have it wait there for you. And that's a reality. There will be a void, that once that category is created, and then even beyond that, so it's kind of, a little bit make it up as you go, because I don't feel like it exists. I mean, we started out at 7 years. That was our first age point. And then, now we're upwards of 12 years old and pushing that. And as long as I can make something great out of older whiskey, that, I'll get into that category. That's my hope, is to make that one of the, cause that's one of the boxes that, the consumers check as far as what's a great whiskey. Well, these 50, 60-year-old scotches are selling for $3 million. Surely, we got to get into some older bourbons, right? That's what makes it better. And we all know
Mhm.
that's not always the case, and rarely is that the case. But you can do some good stuff with that. And as we,
Mhm.
continue to evolve and, we're innovative and, enhance the production process, the age, maturation, all of that, it continues to evolve. Eventually we'll have, you know, more mature whiskeys, but for now, leave it to the blenders to take what's in the barrel and available and turn it into that great product. Because
Mhm.
to me, luxury means all of the things that I've described, that I grade my whiskeys on as I develop them. And, um, but it's really up to the consumer, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And, um, so we're kind of making it up as we go along
Mhm.
based on historical, um, products that have been available in the market, as well as the consumer base and what they demand.
And you touched on a couple things in that bit about it, at least in the bourbon marketplace, we've, I think, gotten confused the idea that advanced age is luxury and luxury is advanced age, right?
Right.
And I've even I've put people in this position where I've blinded them with 3 bottles of Benchmark
Yeah.
and one Pappy 15,
Yeah.
and 75% of the group, very interest in whiskey, don't like 15-year-old whiskey, right?
Right.
They don't. Now, there are components that exist in that advanced stage whiskey that if it becomes a part of a blend, I
Yeah.
think luxury for me starts with a mouthfeel more than anything else, right? There's a silkiness to it, there's a fullness, there's an oiliness or whatever, but a lot of people don't like the tannins that exist in wood at a high level, and that's going to come
Right.
with age. And so, um, I'm glad that there are people, in a world where everyone is pushing for more budget conscientious bourbons, which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of competition in that space. But I think we can go as far back to Aristotle, right, where his mindset was position yourself in a void that you think that needs to be filled, right?
Yep.
And if society agrees, then they'll meet you there. And I think with brands like Frank August and like what you're doing, and a handful of other folks out there, it's becoming evident that there are a group of people that are looking for something that's a little bit more than that. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got my fair share of bottom shelfers that actually live on my top shelf at home because I'll put
Yep.
them in blinds against people, but luxury can be a different thing, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be advanced age. And I've already taken over an hour of your time, and I thoroughly appreciate it. And I've got at least 25 more questions that have been built here and that exist over here. So we'll have to touch base again soon.
Absolutely. I'd love that.
The last thing, and I didn't do this up front, and I'm getting worse about this. Where can I buy Golden Sheaf? How can I consume your content?
Yeah, I love that question. So we are in Nebraska. We're all over the state of Nebraska. I'm thrilled every time I walk into an account that I wasn't aware of, and whether it's a new restaurant or liquor store, and they've got Golden Sheaf on the shelf. So without highlighting any of the main locations, we're in all the liquor stores and grocery stores and big box stores, a lot of restaurants, and so Nebraska for sure. Kentucky, we're spreading like wildfire. We're in liquor barns. We're in Evergreen, Cox's. We are in some of the boutique stores, Blind Pig down in Bardstown. So Bardstown Bourbon Company sells us in their retail shop.
Mhm.
Um, we're in Justin's House of Bourbon, some of those specialty stores. And so a number of Kroger's across the state. So Kentucky's a work in progress. A lot of fun down there, just spreading the gospel. And
Mhm.
so geographically, physically in those 2 states, and that's it. And that's by design. But we're on sealbox.com, which is where you can find a lot of really good whiskeys that are, limited to a handful of states or that you can't find everywhere. So sealbox.com has our standard bourbon and rye. Getting ready to restock both here really soon within the next couple days. I know we ran out, which is a good problem to have, but we got to get those supplies back in there. That's it for now. Sealbox, I think, delivers to 47 states in the country. And but we're scaling. I mean, we're this close to getting into Missouri. We're not doing it the traditional way. We're kind of backing into it, starting with the consumers, and sips to lips is that's what works for us. I love doing tastings. I love sharing whiskey because inevitably people try the product and the proof is in the pudding. I mean, they drink it and it's good stuff. And I pride myself on that. I love that. I believe in it. But yeah, we'll continue to scale. So that's where we're at now.
Yeah. And it's evident that you've got passion for what you're doing. And I said this before we started, I'm always appreciative of anybody who'll give their time because you can't make more time. But at least following you on Instagram, through the Golden Sheaf site, you can see the volume of in-person tastings that you're doing. And if I compare them against any other brand owner, it's pretty high up there. You and Dixon are probably putting more miles on cars and airplanes than just about any brand owner that I'm seeing right now. And, there's passion there. There's obviously product there, and I'm glad you clarified because I was getting ready to ask you, are you in Kansas or Missouri? Because I'm traveling through both states next week for work, and I was like, I might be able to pick one up in person. But Nebraska is it, and I'm not making it that far north. We're stopping in Kansas City and then going south.
Yeah.
If there's anything else you want to share it. If not, thank you so much for the time that you've given me today.
Yeah, thank you. I just, you mentioned Dixon. I just one thing on that. Dixon's a great friend of mine, and he's also a mentor, and he's got an amazing palate. He knows, kind of grew up in the industry, and but he's also just an amazing human, and he's a lot of influence behind what I do. I mean, that guy goes, and he's got a full size family at home, and he's an amazing dad, amazing husband, but he's married to his brand as well, and he believes in that. And he does it very well. So huge inspiration. So I got to, send a shout out to him and thank you for all that he's ever done for me. He's always been there for me. But we need to get some product out to you and some samples. Maybe next time we do this and we share some whiskey together.
Yeah,
but thank you very much, John. This has been an honor and privilege. I appreciate you sharing your time with me and letting me talk on and on, tell my story.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod. Give me a follow and you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, and contact details. Thanks for stopping by.